My husband stood on the raised platform and smirked down at me, convinced that his threats had bought my silence. He thought the microphone in my hand was for a scripted apology designed to save his reputation. But as the crystal glasses clinked around us, he did not realize I was holding the match that would burn his $50 million empire to the ground. Merry Christmas. Julian, my name is Lorelei, and as I sat at the center of the VIP table, I felt less like a wife and more like a trophy being dusted off for exhibition. The ballroom of the St. Regis in Aspen was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, filled to the brim with the sort of people who thought a $10,000 donation was a reasonable price for absolution. The air was thick, a cloying mixture of imported winter pine and the collective scent of too much money. I smoothed the skirt of my dress. It was deep crimson velvet, heavy and high-necked, a garment chosen specifically by my husband to make me look regal yet contained. I was 34 years old, but in this dress, I felt like a porcelain doll trapped in a display case. Julian sat to my right. At 40, my husband was the picture of American success. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, hiding the tension that I knew coiled in his shoulders. To the room, he was Julian Thorne, the benevolent CEO of Thorne Enterprises, the man who was saving the world one charity gala at a time. He laughed at a joke made by a senator, his teeth white and perfect, his hand resting casually on the table. But I knew the temperature of that hand. It was cold. It was the hand of a man who had systematically dismantled my life brick by brick. My gaze drifted to the woman standing just behind his chair, Victoria Vale. She was the new director of communications, a title that seemed to involve communicating quite a bit with my husband behind closed doors. She wore silver, a sleek contrast to my heavy red velvet. To anyone else, her proximity was professional, the attentive aide ready to assist the boss. But I saw the way her hip brushed the back of his chair. I saw the way her eyes lingered on the back of his neck. It was a subtle, silent claim of ownership that made my stomach churn. Julian sensed my distraction. He leaned in close, his lips brushing my ear. To the photographers flashing away near the stage, it looked like an intimate moment between a loving couple. "Stop staring, Lorelei," he whispered, his voice a low hiss that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You look like a frightened deer. Smile. Remember what is at stake tonight. One wrong move, one deviation from the script, and Noah goes to boarding school in Switzerland tomorrow morning. You will not see him until he is 18. Do you understand me?" I stiffened at the mention of our son. Noah was only 6 years old. He was the only pure thing left in my world, and Julian knew it. He knew that the threat of losing my child was the only chain strong enough to hold me. "I understand," I whispered back, forcing the corners of my mouth upward into a brittle imitation of joy. Julian pulled back and looked at me. Then, it appeared. The smirk. It was a slight lifting of the left corner of his mouth, a gesture of absolute arrogance. He believed he had won. He believed that the broken woman sitting next to him, the woman he had gaslit and isolated for half a year, was completely under his control. He saw the fear in my eyes and mistook it for submission. He did not see the fire burning beneath the ice. 6 months ago, Julian had just been busy. Then he became critical. Then controlling. And finally, he became my jailer. He had convinced the world I was unstable, and he had almost convinced me too. But tonight was different. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming through the high-quality speakers. "Please welcome the family behind Thorne Enterprises for a special Christmas message." Applause erupted, a thunderous wave of noise that seemed to push against my chest. Julian stood up, buttoning his jacket, radiating confidence. He extended a hand to me, expecting me to take it and play my part. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly under the heavy velvet. My hand went to my clutch purse. It was a small, hard box covered in Swarovski crystals. Inside, there was no lipstick, there was no compact mirror, there was only a single silver USB drive. It was cold against my fingertips. It contained every lie, every stolen dollar, and every betrayal Julian and Victoria had committed. I gripped it tight, took my husband's hand, and walked toward the stage to destroy him. 3 weeks earlier, my life had been a carefully constructed illusion of domestic bliss. It was a Monday morning at our estate in Connecticut, the kind of crisp, bright day that usually promised fresh starts. I was arranging white hydrangeas in the foyer, humming softly to myself. It was our 8th wedding anniversary. I expected Julian to walk through the door with a bouquet of peonies, my favorite, or perhaps a small velvet box. Instead, a courier arrived. He did not hand me flowers. He handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with the insignia of Julian's personal law firm. I opened it right there in the hallway, my fingers trembling slightly. The first document was not a love letter. It was a unilateral divorce petition. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, and my breath hitched. Paranoid delusional disorder, I whispered, reading the words that seemed to dance mockingly on the page. Substance abuse, unfit for custody. The accusations were monstrous. They claimed I was a danger to Noah. They demanded full sole custody for Julian before I could even process the horror in my hands. The front door opened. Julian walked in, but he was not alone. Beside him stood a man I had never met, a tall, severe-looking figure with wire-rimmed glasses, carrying a leather medical bag. Julian. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the papers, my voice shaking. "Why are you doing this?" Julian did not look at me with love or even pity. He looked at me like a problem to be solved. "This is Dr. Harland, Lorelei. We are here for an intervention. We can no longer ignore your condition. My condition." I stepped back, knocking over the vase of hydrangeas. Water spilled across the marble floor. "I don't have a condition. I am fine, Dr. Harland stepped forward, his tone patronizingly calm. "Mrs. Thorne, denial is the first stage. Julian has told me about the incidents. Leaving Noah at school for 3 hours last Tuesday. Passing out drunk at the library fundraiser. I didn't leave him," I screamed, panic rising in my throat. The driver never showed up. And the fundraiser. I had 1 glass of champagne and woke up in the car. "I wasn't drunk. You were drugged." "Lorelei," Julian said smoothly, stepping over the broken glass and water. But he didn't mean someone else had done it. His eyes told me the truth. He had done it. He had been poisoning my reputation for months. He pulled another document from his jacket pocket. "This is a settlement agreement. You sign over full custody and all marital assets. In exchange, you get a small monthly allowance, a rented apartment in the city, and we keep this private. If you refuse, Dr. Harlan signs the commitment papers he has in his bag. You will go to a psychiatric facility, and you will never see Noah again. You're insane." I spat at him. "I will fight you. I will hire the best lawyers with what money?" Julian smirked, tapping his phone screen. "I just froze your accounts. Lorelei, your credit cards are dead. You are destitute." The front door opened again. My heart sank as Victoria Vale walked in. She wasn't wearing her office attire. She was wearing a cashmere sweater that looked suspiciously like one missing from my closet. "I'm just here to mediate," Victoria said, her voice dripping with fake concern. She walked past me and stood next to Julian, her hand brushing his arm. "Poor Lorelei. It must be so hard to lose your mind." I looked at the 3 of them, my husband, his mistress, and their hired gun. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a divorce. This was an execution. They weren't just taking my marriage. They were erasing me. They wanted Noah's trust fund. They wanted my silence. And they wanted to play house in my home without the inconvenience of my presence. I won't sign, I said, though my voice was barely a whisper. Then you lose everything, Julian said, his voice devoid of emotion. Think about Noah, Lorelei. Don't make us drag him through a commitment hearing. He knew exactly where to strike. He was weaponizing my love for my son against me. I looked at Victoria, who was now examining her nails, bored by my suffering. I realized then that begging would not save me. Only war would. But in that moment, standing in a puddle of water and broken glass, I had no weapons. I was a prisoner in the house I had built. For the next week, I lived in a gilded cage. 2 burly men in black suits stood guard at the front gate, and another sat in the kitchen, pretending to drink coffee while watching my every move. My phone was gone, the internet cut off. Julian had stripped me of my communication, my money, and my dignity. But he had made one critical error. He had forgotten who I was before I became Mrs. Thorne. He saw me as a socialite wife, good for hosting dinners and looking pretty. He had forgotten that 10 years ago. I was a senior financial data analyst for a top firm in Manhattan. I knew how to follow a paper trail, and I knew that arrogance always left footprints. The breakthrough came from the most innocent source. I was sitting on the floor of Noah's room, watching him play. He was tapping away on an old iPad, one with a spiderweb crack across the screen. Julian had thrown it in the trash bin months ago, claiming it was garbage, but I had fished it out and charged it for Noah to use as a distraction. "Mommy, look at the castle I built," Noah said, tilting the screen toward me. I smiled, but then my eyes caught the notification bar at the top. It was sinking. My heart hammered against my ribs. Because the device was so old, Julian had not bothered to wipe it or log out. It was still connected to his primary iCloud account. That night, after Noah drifted into a restless sleep, I took the tablet into the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the cold tile floor, the cracked screen illuminating my face in the dark. I did not go to the photo gallery. I went straight to the emails and notes. What I found made my blood run cold. I scrolled through 2 years of correspondence between Julian and Victoria. They had not just been sleeping together, they had been planning my destruction. But the personal betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. I found a folder labeled Project Ethelgard. "My God," I whispered, my hand covering my mouth to stifle a gasp. "You greedy monster." It was a schematic for massive embezzlement. Julian was siphoning money from the Thorne Charity Foundation. He was moving donations meant for pediatric cancer research into shell companies in the Virgin Islands. I did the mental math quickly. It was over $50 million. I kept digging. I found an email thread with Dr. Harland. The subject line was Subject L Assessment. Attached was a fake medical history drafted weeks before he had even met me. Payment received. Harland had written, $500,000 is acceptable for the diagnosis you require. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the tablet. They had put a price tag on my sanity. $500,000 to declare me insane and steal my son. Then I found the audio files. It was a recording from his smartwatch, likely triggered accidentally during one of his trysts. I pressed play, holding the speaker to my ear. "She's so pathetic. Julian." Victoria's voice tinny and cruel. "Does she really think you love her?" "She's useful," Julian's voice replied, followed by the clinking of glass. "Or she was. Now she's just an obstacle. Once we declare her incompetent, the trust fund reverts to my control as Noah's guardian. We'll be billionaires. Victoria." I felt a bile rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I didn't have time to be sick. I needed to secure this proof. I remembered an old digital camera I had given Noah to play with. It had a micro SD card inside. I retrieved it from his toy box, and using a card reader dongle I found attached to the old tablet's case, I transferred everything. Every email, every bank statement, every recording. I hid the tiny SD card inside the hem of my dress, sewing it in with a loose thread. I sat back against the bathtub, my mind racing. I could not go to the local police. The sheriff played golf with Julian every Sunday. If I went to them, the evidence would disappear, and I would be institutionalized by morning. I needed a venue where he could not silence me. I needed witnesses. I needed the cameras. I looked at the date on the cracked screen. The Christmas gala was in 3 days. That was my stage. Julian wanted a performance I would give him the performance of a lifetime. The psychological warfare began the next morning. Victoria did not just want my husband. She wanted to erase my existence from the home I had curated for 10 years. I sat in the living room, a silent observer, as she directed movers to clear out my things. "This is hideous," Victoria said, holding up a porcelain vase my grandmother had left me. She didn't even look at me. She just dropped it into a trash bin with a careless thud. "Julian, we really need to modernize this space. It feels so stagnant." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, but I remained silent. Julian walked in a moment later, carrying a few sheets of paper staple-gunned together. He tossed them into my lap. "Memorize this," he commanded. "This is your script for the Christmas gala. You will go up there. You will weep a little, but not too much. We don't want it to be messy, and you will tell the world that you are stepping down from your role in the foundation to seek treatment for your mental health issues. You will thank Victoria for stepping in to help the family during this crisis." I looked down at the words. It was a humiliating confession of sins I had not committed. I am unwell. I have been hallucinating. I am a danger to my family. "I can't say this," I whispered, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. I had to sell this. I had to make him believe I was broken. Julian leaned down, gripping the arms of my chair, trapping me. His face was inches from mine, and his cologne, once a scent I loved, now made me nauseous. "You will say it," he said, his voice low and devoid of warmth. "And you will say it convincingly, because if you stumble, if you deviate by even one word, Noah will be on a private jet to a boarding school in Zurich the next morning. You will not see him until he is 18. Do you understand me?" I let out a sob, sliding out of the chair to my knees, grasping at his suit jacket. "No, please, Julian. Not Noah. He's only 6. He needs me. I'll do it. I promise I'll do it. Just don't send him away." Julian looked down at me with pure disgust, peeling my fingers off his jacket one by one. Pathetic. Get up and start practicing. Later that evening, I went to tuck Noah in. The house felt cold, stripped of its warmth. Noah was curled up under his duvet, clutching a teddy bear. "Mommy," he whispered, pulling me close. "Is everything okay? Everything is going to be fine. Baby." I lied, smoothing his hair. "Mommy just has to fix a few things." "I don't like her," Noah murmured, his voice barely audible. "Miss Victoria." She smiles when Daddy is looking, but when he leaves the room, she looks at me like I'm a bug she wants to squash. My heart shattered. She won't be here forever. "Noah, I promise." 2 days before the gala, Julian took me to a high-end boutique downtown. He did not let me choose my own attire. He selected a dress that was 2 sizes too big, a drab gray color with a high collar that made me look gaunt and aged. "Wear this," he told the sales assistant. "We want her to look fragile." I went into the changing room. As soon as the curtain was drawn, my demeanor changed. The weeping wife vanished. I grabbed the landline phone that sat on the small side table in the dressing suite. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Margot." "It's Lorelei," I whispered urgently into the receiver. "Don't ask questions. I am in trouble. Julian is trying to destroy me." Margot had been my friend since college, and now she was one of the top tech-savvy stylists in the city. "I heard the rumors," Margot said, her voice sharp. "What do you need?" I have evidence. Margot, but I need a way to broadcast it. I need a high-capacity drive that can hijack a localized AV system upon insertion. Can you get that? I can get it, Margot replied without hesitation. I'm styling the Thorn Gala anyway. I'll sew it into the hem of the dress so they don't find it in your purse. I'll meet you there. Thank you. I breathed, hanging up just as the curtain rustled. I walked out wearing the hideous gray dress. My shoulders slumped, my eyes downcast. Perfect, Julian said, looking at my reflection with a sneer. You look exactly like the tragedy you are. For the next 48 hours, I played my role to perfection. I wandered the house in a daze, muttering lines from the script. I let Victoria spill coffee on me without complaining. I let Julian mock me at the dinner table. I let them believe they had won. All while the fire in my gut burned hotter and hotter, waiting for the moment I could finally set their world ablaze. The evening of the gala arrived with the weight of a pending execution. Before we left the house, Julian stopped me in the foyer. He snatched my crystal clutch from my hands and upended it onto the marble table. A lipstick, a small packet of tissues, and a breath mint tumbled out. He tore the lining of the bag open, his fingers frantic, searching for a recording device or a phone. He found nothing. He did not know that Margot had arrived an hour earlier to help me dress. And while zipping me into the crimson velvet gown, she had whispered that the drive was sewn securely into the thick hem of the skirt, invisible to the naked eye and undetectable by a pat-down. Clean this up, Julian snapped at me, adjusting his cufflinks. And get in the car. The ride to the St. Regis was a masterclass in humiliation. Julian sat in the back of the limousine, but he did not sit with me. He sat next to Victoria. I was relegated to the jump seat facing backward, forced to look at them as if I were an unwanted child. Victoria placed a hand on his knee, smoothing the fabric of his tuxedo, while Julian practiced the speech he intended to give, the speech that would bury me. Family is the anchor in the storm, Julian recited, his voice smooth and practiced, staring past me at the partition. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is recognizing when a loved one needs help, needs to step away. It's perfect, Julian, Victoria cooed. They will eat it up. You sound so heartbroken. I stared out the darkened window, watching the snow fall, my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. When we arrived, the flashing lights of the paparazzi were blinding. Rumors had evidently preceded us. As we walked up the red carpet, I felt the heavy gaze of the guests. They were not looking at me with admiration tonight. They were looking with morbid curiosity. They had heard the whispers Julian had planted that Lorelei Thorne had cracked, that she was drinking again, that she was losing her mind. Julian gripped my arm. His fingers dug into the soft flesh of my bicep, hard enough to bruise. He leaned in, smiling for the cameras while he whispered poison into my ear. Smile, Lorelei. If you look miserable, they will just think you are drunk again. Remember, Noah? Do not test me, or you will never see his face again. I widened my smile until my cheeks ached. I am smiling, Julian. See? Inside the ballroom, I spotted Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Klein near the bar. They were former investors who had been quietly pushed out of the company last year. I knew Julian had defrauded them, though they could never prove it. I managed to pull away from Julian's grip for a second as he greeted a senator. I glided over to them. Mr. Henderson, I said, keeping my voice low. It is so good to see you. He looked at me with pity. Lorelei, we heard you aren't feeling well. I am feeling clearer than I have in years, I said, looking him dead in the eye. Do not leave early tonight. Please, regardless of what you hear, wait for the speech. You will want to see the finale. Before he could ask what I meant, Victoria appeared at my elbow. She was holding a large glass of red wine. She pretended to stumble, splashing the dark liquid onto the skirt of my gown. It blended with the crimson velvet, but the wet stain was obvious and humiliating. Oh, clumsy me, she said. her voice dripping with insincere sweetness. "I am so sorry, Lorelei. You really should be more careful where you stand." She expected me to cry. She expected the unstable woman Julian had described. Instead, I looked at the stain, then up at her with a calm that unsettled her. "It is fine, Victoria," I said smoothly. "Red is my color. It hides the blood." Her smile faltered. I seized the opportunity. "I need to go to the ladies' room to dry this off." I walked away, but I did not go to the bathroom. I scanned the room and locked eyes with a young waiter named Thomas. Years ago, I had paid for his mother's surgery anonymously. He gave me a subtle nod and shifted his tray, creating a blockage that stopped a security guard from following me. I slipped behind a heavy velvet curtain and into the service corridor. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I found the door marked Audio-Visual Control. I pushed it open. The room was empty, humming with the sound of server fans. The main projector feed was hooked up to a central console. I reached down to the hem of my dress, my fingernails tearing at the stitching Margot had left loose. I pulled out the small silver USB drive. I plugged it into the main port. A small light on the drive blinked green. Access granted. I had done it. The receiver was in place. Now, all I needed was the remote trigger in my clutch. I slipped back out into the hallway, smoothing my dress, and walked back into the lion's den, ready to roar. The dinner service had ended, and the air in the ballroom shifted from polite conversation to a hushed, expectant reverence. Waiters cleared away plates of half-eaten filet mignon and lobster, making way for the main event. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, feeling the cold, hard edges of the remote control through the thin lining of my pocket. It was a tiny device, no larger than a key fob, but it felt heavier than the diamond necklace Julian had once given me to apologize for missing my birthday. Julian took the microphone. The room dimmed, leaving him bathed in a golden spotlight that made him look like a savior. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice rich with practiced humility. "This year has been the most challenging of my life, but it has also been a year of revelation. I could not have steered Thorne Enterprises through these turbulent waters without a guiding light, a star who stepped in when darkness threatened to consume my home." He gestured to the table where Victoria sat. She lowered her eyes in a performance of modesty that was almost impressive in its deceit. "Victoria Vale," Julian continued, his voice breaking with manufactured emotion. "She has been more than a director of communications. She has been the glue holding this company, and frankly, this family. Together, while my wife, while Lorelei has battled her personal demons." A ripple of sympathetic murmurs moved through the crowd. I did not flinch. I did not look down. I turned my head slowly toward the back corner of the room. There, in the shadows near the emergency exit, stood the nanny holding Noah's hand. My son looked small and terrified in his miniature tuxedo. His eyes were wide, searching the room until they found mine. In that gaze, I found the steel I needed. He was not just a child, he was the reason I was going to burn this entire room to the ground. "And so," Julian announced, his tone brightening, "before we launch our new initiative, the Ethelgard Foundation, which aims to raise $100 million for underprivileged youth, I want to invite my wife to the stage. She has something she wishes to share with you all before she takes a leave of absence to seek the help she so desperately needs." The applause was polite but hesitant. This was the moment they had all been whispering about, the breakdown, the public confession. I stood up. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move. I walked toward the stairs, every step echoing the beat of my heart. The spotlight swung toward me, blinding and hot. I ascended the stairs, the red velvet of my gown trailing behind me like a pool of blood. Julian met me at the podium. He reached out and took my hand, pulling me into a side embrace that looked supportive to the audience. But his grip was iron. He squeezed my waist so hard my ribs groaned in protest. He leaned in, placing a kiss on my cheek, and his lips brushed against my skin with the coldness of a reptile. "Stick to the script," he whispered, his voice a razor-sharp hiss only I could hear. "One wrong word, and you say goodbye to Noah forever. Do not test me, Lorelei, or I will destroy you." He pulled back and looked at me. There it was, the smirk. It was subtle, just a twitch of the corner of his mouth, but it screamed victory. He handed me the microphone, his eyes mocking me, daring me to defy him. The room fell silent. Hundreds of faces looked up at me. I saw pity and some morbid curiosity in others. I looked past the blinding lights to the front table. Victoria was raising a flute of champagne to her lips, smiling over the rim. She was already celebrating her victory. She thought I was finished. I looked down at the piece of paper Julian had shoved into my hand. The words swam before my eyes. "I am sorry. I am broken. I am leaving." I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and the underlying rot of betrayal. I did not look at the paper. I did not look at Julian. I looked straight ahead, directly into the lens of the main camera that was broadcasting this event live to the entire world. My thumb brushed the button on the remote in my pocket. The time for silence was over. I gripped the microphone, my knuckles white, and lowered my head, letting a tremor enter my voice. "My husband wants me to tell you that I am not well," I whispered into the mic, my voice catching in a perfectly rehearsed sob. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Julian nod, his shoulders relaxed. He thought I had broken. He thought he had won. I raised my head. The tears were gone. My eyes were dry, cold, and focused. My voice shifted, dropping the tremor, becoming as hard and sharp as a diamond cutter. And he is absolutely right. I am not well. I am not well because for the last 6 months, I have been living with a monster disguised as a man. The silence in the room shattered. Julian's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with shock. He lunged for the microphone. "Give me that," he snarled, abandoning his charming persona. But I was faster. My thumb pressed the button on the remote in my pocket. Click! Behind us. The massive LED screen that had been displaying the Thorn Enterprises logo flickered and went black. A split second later, it illuminated the entire ballroom with a new image. In bold, red letters, the words Project Ethelgard appeared, followed by a cascading list of bank transfers. "What is this?" Julian gasped, freezing in his tracks. He stared up at the screen as column after column of numbers scrolled by. Transfers of $2 million, $5 million, $10 million, all moved from the charity fund to offshore accounts in the Virgin Islands. A collective gasp swept through the room like a physical wave. The guests were no longer looking at me. They were staring at the irrefutable proof of grand larceny. "That is $50 million. "Julian," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, drowning out the murmurs. "Stolen from the very children you claim to save." The screen shifted again. This time, it was a grainy video. It was security footage from our library, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. It showed Julian and Victoria sitting on the sofa, laughing as Julian poured a white powder into a glass of wine. Then the audio kicked in. It was the recording I had saved from his smartwatch. Julian's voice, clear and arrogant, echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "That bitch is so stupid. Just threaten to take the kid, and she'll sign anything. We'll have her in the loony bin by New Year's, and the money will be ours." The sound of shattering glass pierced the air. At the VIP table, Victoria had dropped her champagne flute. It lay in pieces on the floor, red wine pooling around her silver shoes like blood. Her face was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The room erupted into chaos. People were standing up, pointing, shouting. I did not stop. I turned back to the screen, Channeling every ounce of my professional training, I was no longer the victim, I was the analyst. "If you look at the third column," I said, pointing to the screen as if I were leading a board meeting, "you will see that the medical expenses for the charity match exactly with the deposits into Ms. Vale's private accounts in the Caymans." And here the screen changed to show the fake medical report in the email from Dr. Harland is the $500,000 invoice for my false diagnosis. I looked at Julian. He stood center stage, stripped of his power, stripped of his lies. He looked small. He looked terrified. "You wanted a speech." "Julian," I said, my voice cold. "Here it is." The reaction was instantaneous and deafening. The polite veneer of the gala dissolved into a chaotic storm of outrage. I watched from the stage as the room turned against Julian. The shareholders, men and women who had trusted him with their fortunes, were on their feet. I saw Mr. Henderson shouting into his phone, undoubtedly calling his legal team. The flashes of the paparazzi cameras, once a source of vanity for Julian, now fired like machine guns, capturing every second of his humiliation. Julian scrambled back to the microphone, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked deranged, his eyes darting back and forth between the screen and the angry crowd. "This is a lie," he screamed, his voice cracking. "It is AI deepfake technology. She is mentally unstable. You cannot believe this." She fabricated all of it, but the denial fell flat. The bank statements on the screen were too detailed, the routing numbers too specific. The audio recording of his own voice mocking the very people he was begging for belief was playing on a loop, a haunting soundtrack to his demise. I looked toward the exit and saw a flash of silver. Victoria. She was trying to slip away during the confusion, keeping her head down, moving toward the service doors. But she did not make it far. Margot stepped out from behind a pillar, flanked by 2 large security guards I had positioned there before the speech began. "Going somewhere?" "Victoria," Margot asked loudly, crossing her arms. Victoria stopped, trapped. The guests near the door turned on her, their faces twisted with disgust. She shrank back, realizing there was no escape. On stage, Julian realized his words were useless. The charm was gone. The mask had fallen off. He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw the true depth of his violence exposed to the world. His face was purple with rage, his teeth bared like a wild animal. "You ungrateful bitch," he roared. "I will kill you!" He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. I did not move. I did not flinch. Before he could touch me, a massive figure stepped out from the shadows of the wings. It was Marcus, a private security contractor I had hired 3 days ago, using the last of my diamond earrings. Marcus didn't hesitate. He intercepted Julian mid-stride, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back with practiced ease. Julian screamed in pain as Marcus slammed him face first onto the wooden floor of the stage. "Stay down," Marcus barked. The violence shocked the room into a momentary silence, but it was broken by a small, terrified voice. "Mommy!" I turned to see Noah running up the stairs of the stage, breaking away from the stunned nanny. I dropped to my knees, opening my arms just in time for him to collide with me. I wrapped my cape of red velvet around him, shielding his eyes from the sight of his father being pinned to the ground. "I've got you, baby," I whispered into his hair, my own tears finally threatening to spill. "I've got you. It's over." Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. A team of agents in windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI swarmed into the room. I had emailed the entire dossier, the embezzlement, the fraud, the tampering with medical records to the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 30 minutes before I walked onto the stage. Julian Thorne, the lead agent, shouted, marching down the aisle, "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Julian struggled against Marcus's grip, his face pressed against the floorboards, spitting and cursing. "You can't do this to me! Do you know who I am?" Julian shrieked, sounding less like a titan of industry and more like a petulant child. "Lorelei, tell them to stop. I will ruin you. I will take everything." I stood up, holding Noah's hand tightly. I looked down at the man who had terrified me for so long. He was pathetic. He was weak. And as the agents hauled him to his feet and snapped the handcuffs around his wrists, I realized that no one in the room was looking at him with fear anymore. They were looking at him with revulsion. The king had fallen, and his castle was made of nothing but glass. The ballroom was a cacophony of shouting agents, flashing cameras, and the shocked murmurs of the elite. I stood alone at the edge of the stage, watching the FBI agents shove my husband toward the double doors. His tuxedo was rumpled, his hair wild, and his dignity entirely stripped away. He twisted his head back to look at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. My voice was steady, echoing through the high-definition speakers with crystal clarity. "Merry Christmas." "Julian," I said, my tone as cold as the aspen snow outside. "I hope you like your present." It is a pair of handcuffs. As they dragged him out, the agents descended on Victoria. She was near the kitchen entrance, trying to argue with a federal officer. The arrogance that had defined her for months was gone, replaced by a frantic, trembling desperation. "I was just an employee," she shrieked as they twisted her arms behind her back. "I did what he told me to do. You can't arrest me. Please, I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Ms. Vale," the agent replied, snapping the cuffs on her wrists. "I suggest you use it." With the villains removed, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The guests, who minutes ago had been whispering about my insanity, suddenly swarmed toward the stage. They were like sharks smelling fresh blood, only now I was the predator they wanted to align with. "Lorelei, darling," a woman who had ignored me all night called out, reaching for my hand. "We had no idea you were so brave to endure that, Mrs. Thorne, if you need legal representation, my firm is at your disposal," a man shouted from the second row. I looked down at them. These were the same people who had watched me suffer, who had believed the lies because it was convenient. I did not smile. I did not thank them. I looked through them as if they were made of glass. I turned my attention to the press cameras, which were still rolling, broadcasting live. "Let me be clear," I announced, my voice cutting through the babble of the crowd. "Effective immediately. I am assuming the role of interim CEO of Thorne Enterprises. My first act will be to freeze all executive bonuses. I will personally oversee the liquidation of Julian's private assets to repay every single cent stolen from the charities. $50 million will be returned to the children it was meant for." A hush fell over the room. I wasn't done. I knew Julian. I knew he would try to buy his way out of jail before the sun came up. I tapped the tablet one last time. "And just to ensure justice is served," I said, looking into the lens, "I am releasing one final recording to the authorities and the press right now. It is a conversation between Julian and Judge Walker regarding a bribe to dismiss any future divorce proceedings." The audio played briefly, Julian's voice unmistakable. "I own Walker. $50,000 and he'll sign whatever custody order I draft." That was the nail in the coffin. There would be no bail. There would be no favors. Julian was finished. I looked over at the side of the stage. Margot was standing there, arms crossed, a small, proud smile on her face. Beside her stood Marcus and the waiter, Thomas. They were the only people in this room who mattered. "Thank you," I mouthed to them. Margot winked. It was a silent acknowledgement of a bond that money could not buy. On the giant LED screen behind me, the image of Julian's smug corporate headshot froze. Then, slowly, It desaturated, turning into a stark, grainy black and white image. It looked like an obituary. The reign of Julian Thorne was officially dead. I crouched down and picked up Noah. He buried his face in my neck, his small arms wrapping tight around me. He was heavy, but he felt like the only real thing in the world. "Let's go home, baby," I whispered. I walked down the stairs of the stage, stepping over the broken glass of Victoria's champagne flute. I walked straight down the center aisle, clutching my son, my head held high. I did not look left or right. I left the diamonds, the caviar, and the false smiles behind me, walking out of the golden cage and into the cold, clean night air. 1 week had passed since the night I burned down my husband's empire. I sat in what used to be Julian's private office at the headquarters of Thorne Enterprises. The first thing I had done was remove the heavy, suffocating velvet drapes that he loved so much. Now, the room was flooded with natural sunlight, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The space no longer smelled of expensive cigars and secrets. It smelled of lemon polish and fresh air. The phone on the mahogany desk buzzed. It was Julian's high-priced defense attorney, a man who sounded significantly less arrogant than he had 7 days ago. "Mrs. Thorne," the lawyer said, his voice tight. "My client is willing to make a deal. If you drop the civil suits regarding the emotional distress, he is willing to plead guilty to the lesser fraud charges. He wants to avoid a maximum sentence. We think this is a fair compromise to spare the family further embarrassment." I leaned back in the leather chair, twirling a pen between my fingers. I thought about the cold cell where Julian was currently sleeping. I thought about the way he had squeezed my arm until it bruised. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice calm and absolute. "There will be no deal. There will be no compromise. Tell Julian that he wanted to send me to an asylum for the rest of my life. The least he can do is experience a fraction of that confinement. He sits in prison for every single day of his sentence. Do you understand me?" I hung up the phone before he could argue. The victory was absolute. Earlier that morning, I had received the news that Victoria Vale had turned on Julian completely. Terrified of spending her 30s in a federal penitentiary, she had sung like a canary. She revealed every single secret account, every shell company, and every hidden asset Julian had stashed away. The authorities had seized it all. Julian Thorne was not just a prisoner, he was a pauper. But the most important victory had come from the family court judge just 2 hours ago. Based on the overwhelming evidence of abuse, drug tampering, and the attempted framing of a sane mother, the judge had issued an emergency order. I was awarded 100% legal and physical custody of Noah. Julian was slapped with a permanent restraining order. He was never allowed to come within 500 feet of our son again. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. I had already made plans for the money we recovered. I was not keeping the $50 million. I was establishing a new foundation dedicated to helping women trapped in financially abusive marriages and victims of gaslighting. I wanted to ensure that no other woman would ever have to sew a hard drive into the hem of her dress just to be heard. That evening, the air was crisp and cold. I was no longer in the sprawling, empty mansion in Connecticut. Noah and I had moved into a warm, cozy apartment in the city, a place that felt like a home, not a museum. "Mommy." "Look," I put the star on Noah cheered, clapping his hands. We were decorating a real Christmas tree, one that smelled of pine and sticky sap. It was covered in mismatched ornaments, handmade paper snowflakes, and blinking, multicolored lights far from the designer perfection Julian had always demanded. I looked at the kitchen counter. Resting there was the old, cracked tablet. The screen was shattered, the battery was weak, but it was the most valuable thing I owned. It was the silent witness that had saved our lives. I reached out and touched the cold glass, a smile spreading across my face. It was not a smile for the cameras. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated freedom. I walked out onto the small balcony, the winter wind biting at my cheeks. In my hand, I held a crumpled piece of paper. It was the speech Julian had forced me to memorize, the confession of insanity he had tried to shove down my throat. I flicked a lighter. The flame danced in the wind, hungry and bright. I touched it to the corner of the paper. I watched as the lies turned to ash, curling and blackening in my hand. I released the burning paper, watching the embers float up into the dark, clear winter sky, disappearing among the stars. Julian had spent his life underestimating me. He smirked when he thought I was a frightened lamb, easily led to the slaughter. But he forgot the most basic law of nature. A mother sheep will turn into a lion the moment her child is threatened. And lions do not bow, they hunt. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below where you are listening from. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button so more people can hear the truth.